Welcome to Das German Kritic, weil hey, außer mir macht's ja keiner.
Wir lassen der Dom in Köln, dem neue Hütte hin. Was soll der dann woanders? Das hätt doch keine Sinn.
Yeah, sorry for my little outburst of joy just now. Don't know where that came from. But yes, as of recording this video and uploading this video, we are, in fact, in the carnival season.
Carnival in Germany has several origins. The first, of course, being the many pre-Christian ceremonies conducted by the countless Germanic and Celtic tribes east of the Rhine River. The second, of course, being the Roman festival of Saturnalia, celebrated on the left side of the Rhine River.
A very important custom during this festival, which usually took place at around December 25th, was that the entire Roman world was turned upside down. Slaves became masters, masters became slaves, men became women, women became men, just everything crazy and bonkers and upside down.
With the advent of Christianity, these customs became banned at first, but then experienced a revival during the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance.
And hey, since they obviously had a shit ton of fun doing it, why shouldn't we? So, for the next 4 reviews, we're going to take a look at, let's say, international films that don't usually get covered on the show. And we're going to begin this wild and wacky ride with 1995's Jumanji.
This dark family film has stayed in the public consciousness primarily for 2 reasons. For one, it sparked a very popular and well-known meme, and secondly, there is a certain character in the movie, the reason for whom some of the now 25 to 35-year-olds only now came to understand.
So one of you out there better make sure you roll a 5 or an 8, because we're going to take a look at Jumanji.
The film begins near the fictional town of Brantford in 1869 with 2 brothers during a stormy night. What are they doing? Burying the titular Jumanji, a haunted game that bears severe consequences for everyone playing it.
So, right from the get-go, we're pretty much told everything we need to know. We know that the game is haunted. We know that it has existed well 100 years before the actual story kicks in, and we hear that iconic drum beat the game uses to get people to play it.
We jump ahead exactly 100 years, where we meet our main character, Alan Parrish, played as a child by Adam Han Bird, riding his bike through the clean, quiet, and idyllic Brantford of 1969. On his way, he passes a large statue of General Angus Parrish, who is obviously either his grandfather or great-grandfather.
Why are we shown specifically this? Patience, my dear viewers, patience.
Unfortunately for Alan, though, he's soon followed by the local bully Billy Jessup, played by Gary Joseph Thorpe, and his gang, of whom Alan flees into his dad's shoe factory. There, we meet said father, Samuel Sam Parrish, played by Jonathan Hyde, as well as Alan's friend Carl Bentley, played by David Alan Grier, simply known as Soul Man.
Get it? Soul, like the sole of your shoe, and soul as in soul music that originated within the black community. Yeah. It sucks.
What doesn't suck, though, is Carl's newest shoe design.
I gotta show you something. Come here. Now, I've been working on this for almost a year, and I got an appointment this afternoon with your father to show him this. Go ahead, take it. So what do you think? Do you think he'll like it?
What is it?
What is it? Man, this is the future. If I can get Will Chamberlain to wear them, I predict there'll be a pair of those in every closet in America.
Now, you may be thinking this is an old cliche. And yes, it is, but not without merit.
Through history, there have been countless examples of someone inventing something or figuring something out decades or centuries before it was rediscovered. For example, centuries before Kepler and Galileo ever picked up a pencil, the Greek scientist Hypatia not only realized that the Earth goes around the Sun, not the other way around, but she also figured out that the Earth's orbit is elliptical. For another example, in the flooded tunnel of one of the many cenotes dotting Yucatan, scientists found a Mayan sacrificial site.
The joke? The tunnel was already flooded when that sacrifice took place.
Thus, the Mayans conducting the sacrifice must have invented some sort of mechanism to supply them with oxygen. Centuries before Europeans would do any deep-sea exploration themselves. And going back to the Mediterranean, the Greek engineer Heron of Alexandria invented what is essentially a primitive steam engine.
And yes, archaeologists have actually reconstructed this, and yes, it actually works.
But getting back to the movie, Alan thoughtlessly places said shoe on a conveyor belt, causing the machine to go haywire, for which Bentley takes the blame. Which, of course, gets him fired.
Fun fact, I didn't even notice Carl in the background until I watched this movie again for this review. 22 years, and this film can still surprise you.
But not only Carl is having a bad day. Upon leaving factory grounds, Billy and his gang wait for Alan and beat him up off screen. However, things get tipped in his favor when he hears the sound of the drums and finally comes across the titular Jumanji and takes it home. At dinner, Alan and his father get into a fight over Alan going to a boarding school. This scene is important as it's the last time Sam and his son see and talk to each other before shit gets real. Alan decides to run away, but to his surprise, he gets a visit from Sara Whitle, played as a child by Laura Bell Bundy, who was nice enough to bring his bike back. Since he secretly has the hots for her, Alan invites her in and shows her that great new game that he's found.
Being 13, Sara is of course too old to be playing board games and then just casually chucks the dice onto the playing field. And so it begins.
Seeing the pawn moving all on its own, Alan assumes the game, quote-unquote, thinks. After reading the text displayed on the central dome, the two decide this is getting too scary and they want to end the game. Unfortunately, though, Alan gets scared by the strike of the living room clock and accidentally drops the dice he held in his hand, and the two again bend over the dome.
And this time, however, shit gets real.
Long story short, Alan gets sucked into the game, after which a bunch of bats come out of the fireplace and chase a terrified Sara out of the house and down the street. The film then holds on the front door, and through a dissolve, we jump to 26 years later, where we meet Judy, played by Kirsten Dunst, and her younger brother Peter, played by Bradley Pierce, who now move into the old Parrish house together with their Aunt Nora, played by Bibi Neuwirth.
You see, the two tragically lost their parents in a car accident, and while Peter deals with it by being quiet and introverted, Judy, well...
Oh my, I'm so sorry. How terribly awful.
It's okay. We barely even knew our parents. They were always away. Skiing in St. Moritz, gambling in Monte Carlo, safaring in darkest Africa. We didn't even know if they loved us. But when the Sheik's yacht went down, well, they managed to write us a really beautiful goodbye note that was found floating in a champagne bottle amongst the debris. Excuse me.
No, they didn't, you lying sack of shit. But then again, Judy can lie more convincingly than this broad here. Because, as we all know, snipers love to send letters of endearment before putting one between your eyes.
Anyway, while exploring, Peter not only comes across a bust of Angus Parrish, but also across one of the bats from 1969. And Nora calls animal control, and the exterminator recalls what allegedly happened when Alan vanished.
Well, whatever it was, it's gone now. Bats aren't what I'd worry about in this house anyways.
What would you worry about?
Well, personally, I wouldn't want to live in a house where someone was murdered.
Murdered?
Yep, little Alan Parrish. I say his father did it. There's 1,001 places he could have hid the body in this house. Especially if he chopped it up first.
The next day, the game has become aware of their presence and calls out to them as it did to Alan. And, just like Alan, Judy and Peter find the game and decide to play it. Judy rolls a 6 and conjures a bunch of gigantic mosquitoes, and Peter rolls 2 1s and conjures a horde of monkeys.
But since doubles get another turn, Peter is allowed to roll again. And what does he roll? You guessed it, a 5.
Thus, apart from conjuring a huge lion, Peter also inadvertently brings back Alan, played as an adult by Robin Williams, and immediately after his return, we get a very touching scene in which he breaks the door to his old room and finds all his stuff still there as it was 26 years ago. He gets absolutely ecstatic when Peter confirms having rolled a 5, but after a run through the house, Alan's happiness is immediately dampened when Judy and Peter tell him who they are and what has happened. This causes Alan to run out of the house, only to come across Carl Bentley, who is now a police officer.
No! Get down off of my car, please, and get up on the sidewalk.
What year is it?
It was brand new.
No. What year is it?
1995. Remember? Yes, this is the origin of that famous meme we all know that keeps popping up when someone somewhere hears that Hollywood is again remaking a movie that's 20 years old or even older.
And since it's 1995, Alan can't just Google his parents' whereabouts, but instead runs through 1995 Brantford, which is in shambles after Parrish Shoes closed down.
The interesting thing about this scene, though, is that it is actually a very timely commentary and reference.
Remember, this film is set and was made during a time when companies like GM and the city of Detroit were really, noticeably going downhill. Alan reaches the old shoe factory where he comes across a hobo
Without a shotgun, but with a dog.
Who tells him what happened to Sam and the factory after Alan simply vanished into thin air. This scene is one of the reasons why this is my favorite Robin Williams movie. Why?
Because this is the only Robin Williams movie that doesn't have that fucking speech.
You know, the sappy, cheesy speech with the interchangeable lines that even the nostalgia critic made fun of. So after visiting his parents' grave, and after much persuasion from Judy and Peter, Alan decides to help them continue the game.
Yet, it appears that baby Alan wasn't that far off when he surmised that the game thinks. Turns out, they're continuing the game from 1969, which means it's not Alan's turn.
Whose turn is it?
Sara, Whitle.
Thus, Alan, Judy, and Peter go to Sarah's old house, where she actually still lives, now under the pseudonym Madame Serena and working as a psychic. Alan jogs her memory, which causes her to faint. Back at the house, Sara doesn't want to continue playing either, which causes Alan to fuck with her in the worst way possible.
Play the game, Sara.
Oh, no.
Fine. Just give me the dice and you can go home. You don't have to play.
Thank you, Alan. Oh my God! How could you do that?
It's law of the jungle, Sara. You'll get used to it.
Sara conjures the flora of Jumanji, and apart from a few bits here and there, I really do love the fact that the majority of the plants that actually do stuff are practical effects.
Especially the hentai pod. What's the hentai pod?
A gigantic, yellow, carnivorous plant that uses its vines to snare Peter and almost devours him whole. Moving into the lounge area, it's Alan's turn, and he conjures the fierce hunter Van Pelt.
Oh, Van Pelt. Where do we even begin with this character? I would say we begin with the most obvious point. The fact that everyone who is now, let's say, 25 to, let's be generous here, 35, couldn't figure out that this character is played by the same guy who plays the father. Are you fucking kidding me? I figured this shit out when I first watched it. Granted, I couldn't figure out the obvious implication of this, but I did have somewhat of a hunch when I noticed... I found it strange. Did I? Oh, Van Pelt. Where do we even begin with this character? I guess we should begin with the most obvious. The fact that everyone who is now, let's say, 25 to, let's be generous here, 35, couldn't figure out that this character is played by the same actor who plays the father. Are you fucking kidding me? I figured this shit out when I first watched the film. Okay, granted, I didn't realize the obvious implication, but I did find it strange that the hunter looks very similar to the father.
But disregarding that, let's talk about the obvious implication of this choice. For one, we now understand why we've been shown the face of Angus Parrish, because Van Pelt is the physical embodiment of Alan's ancestry, haunting him and hunting him since his birth. And secondly, there is the name, Van Pelt, which is essentially a mix of the Dutch preposition van, of, and the English pelt, ergo of pelt, or to put it better, of the cloth. In other words, Sam is trying to get Alan to the point where he's cut from the same cloth as his father and grandfather.
Like making him go to an age-old institution that Alan has no interest in.
Van Pelt chases Alan while shooting at him, but fortunately for Alan, the hunter runs out of ammo. Alan gets back to the house, and after everyone goes to the library, he and Sara get into an argument.
What's the deal with you and this guy?
He's a hunter. He kills things. That's what he does. And right now, he wants to hunt me and kill me, okay?
Why you?
Why me? I don't know. Everything about me he finds offensive. You think it'd be a waste of his time. Maybe he needs something for his wall, you know? A parrot.
It's your
Something to
turn.
go between penguin and
Well,
partridge.
you ever thought about just sitting down and talking about your differences?
What, are you crazy? The man has a gun.
Don't ever call me crazy, Alan. Ever. Because everyone in this town has called me crazy ever since I told the cops that you were sucked into a board game.
Listen,
Maybe I should roll.
crazy. It's just
Do you have any
crazy.
idea what it's like
Yeah.
to be known as the little girl who saw Alan Parrish murdered? Do you think anybody showed up at my 14th birthday party?
Well, not even
Hello, I'm rolling
Just
now.
a party up.
Billy who?
I'm gonna roll.
Well, oh, what are you, an owl? What? Come on, Madam Serena. Why don't you dig in the lower reaches of your higher consciousness
just roll.
and find the memory of your old boyfriend, Billy?
Little kid who used to steal your bike?
Their argument is cut short, though, when Judy conjures a stampede. Among the animals is also a pelican that snatches the game from them and flies off.
Meanwhile,
What can I do for you?
What gross are these?
You know, they stopped making these in 1903.
I don't know what it is, but for some reason, that line always cracks me up. Maybe it's the actor's delivery, or maybe it's the fact that Van Pelt's bullets are 92 years out of date. Might want to upgrade there, dude. And upgrade he does when he gets himself a shiny new sniper rifle.
At a river, Alan and the others catch up with the pelican. Alan tries to get the game back, but fails miserably. Luckily for them, Peter's skills are far better, and thus he manages to fish the game from the river. On their way back to the house, though, they're not only stalked by Van Pelt, but also have a run-in with Carl.
And Officer Carl Bentley clearly has had enough of this shit.
I don't believe this. Every time there's trouble, I run into you.
Me? I don't know what you're talking about.
All right, I'm taking you in for
I'm
questions.
not going anywhere.
All right.
Just a second. You can't take him. He's,
Since he's only a few steps away from the central dome, Peter tries to cheat by attempting to roll the dice such that they land accordingly.
And since the game does think, the punishment for Peter's transgression follows swiftly.
Peter, your hands! Look at your hands!
During the drive to the station, Alan tells Carl who he really is, after which Carl agrees to help him. Meanwhile in town, Sara and the kids try to get money to bail Alan out when they run into Van Pelt, who takes the game away from them during a stampede and then heads to Sir Save-A-Lot, a local discount store.
And now we come to the most disliked scene in the entire film. The scene where Peter builds a makeshift trap to stop Van Pelt.
You see, a few years before, Home Alone came out. And since it was a hit, every 90s kids movie wanted to be like Home Alone. After that, the group goes back to the house, the inside of which has now been completely taken over by the flora and fauna of Jumanji. Now, regarding this, Adam of YMS rightly asked why they even decide to go back to the house in the first place.
Now, this is a very valid point. However, I would argue that if you're playing a game where everything and everyone in it wants to kill you and you don't know what comes next, I don't think it matters where you play this.
Next, Sara conjures a monsoon inside the house, And after Alan fights a crocodile, all of them seek higher ground, where he gets himself into a predicament by conjuring quicksand. Sara rushes over to help him, but the two get trapped in the floor when Judy triggers an event within the game, after which Peter proceeds by conjuring a shit ton of giant spiders.
I know that I'm basically just nitpicking here, but wouldn't it be cool if a CGI spider just crawled over the screen?
Judy then gets knocked out when one of the poisonous plants comes through the floor and shoots its darts in her neck when she tries to get the game out of the spider's reach. But thankfully, Alan and Sara get out of their predicament when Sara conjures an earthquake. The earthquake splits the entire house, causing Alan and the game to fall through the cracks. By sheer chance, Alan manages to snatch the game before falling onto the floor of what I presume to be the living room. Since he's almost at the central dome, Alan grabs the dice and wants to finish.
Don't move! Stand up. What's in your hand? Drop it.
Alan drops the dice, and through a tracking shot of the one that falls down a crack, we see that, luckily for him, the second dice lands on the right side needed to finish. Unimpressed with what he hears, Van Pelt pulls the trigger in the exact moment that Sara wants to take the bullet herself. But since Alan has finished and called out the game's name, the bullet dissolves right in front of their eyes, and everything that came from the game gets sucked back into the jungle from where it all came from. Due to its magic nature, Jumanji takes Sara and Alan back to 1969, where they originally began their adventure. And this at the exact same time that Alan's father, having forgotten his coat, returns back home.
Talk about timing.
Alan, of course, uses this opportunity to reconcile with his father and tell him the truth about the shoe on the conveyor belt. And considering the spirit in which the two parted, Sam takes it rather well.
But then again, I guess an argument could be made by simply saying that Sam just had a really, really shitty day. I mean, the first time we actually see this character is sometime during that day, and for all we know, his day could have gone to shit right from the moment that he stepped out of bed.
So after everything they've been through, Sara and Alan decide to get rid of the game. And again, I have to paraphrase Adam from YMS and say that they do this in the most irresponsible way possible by simply tying some stones to it and dumping it in the local river.
Really? I mean, fucking really? You are so confident in your actions that you honestly don't think this thing isn't gonna snare or get stuck on a rock or anything? You wanna know what really destroys this game? Fire. Kill it with fire. Kill it with fire before it starts to spawn.
This act of irresponsibility is especially weird because right after that, Sara gives Alan his first kiss ever after saying she doesn't want to feel too much like a grown-up. Anyway, the film then dissolves to the actual 1995 with a large Christmas party at the Parrish household. Alan has now taken over as CEO of Parrish Shoes. He and Sara are now married, and Sara is pregnant.
And since he's the new CEO, he can employ whoever he wants. And take a wild guess who his new marketing genius is.
That's right, Mr. Shepherd himself, having appeared with his wife Martha as well as the real-life Judy and Peter.
Which begs the question, did Alan hire him on purpose? And if the answer to that question is yes, then boy howdy, is this going to be awkward sometime in the future. So this was pretty much the movie, except there is one last scene that we have to talk about.
The last scene of the film shows the game buried in the sand of a beach with two French-speaking girls hearing the ominous drum music.
Okay, first off, we're expected to believe that this game somehow managed to make the trip out of New Hampshire, then out to the open ocean, only to then wash up on the beach of some French-speaking country? And secondly, I hope those two French girls have adequate English skills, or else they're going to be fucked when they try to play the game. Or does the central dome magically translate the poetry into the language of the player? Either way, this was Jumanji, the first movie in our lineup of non-German films. And since we're doing everything vice versa, we're going to start with the bad stuff this time.
The first and foremost thing that should be criticized is the CGI. Great for the time, but now they just look really dated. Secondly, there are of course a few plot holes here and there. For example, back in 1969, when Sara tells the cops that Alan got sucked into a board game, that game is still there when Sam and Alan's mom come home.
And no one ever tried to play this game to see if what Sara said was actually true? Somehow I find this hard to believe. But thankfully, there is a lot of good stuff in this film, so let's talk about it.
For one, of course, there's the darkness and seriousness of what is essentially a kids' movie. I mean, seriously, would you ever guess that by looking at the box art? Next, there's the dynamic between Sam and his son. You really do get the feeling that Sam does mean well by sending Alan to this boarding school, even though the way he went about it wasn't all that tactful.
And lastly, there's that kick-ass, scary-as-shit drumbeat that just lures children like the Pied Piper to get them to play it. This was Das German Kritic, and in the next review of a non-German film, we're going to take a trip to Japan.